We will be covering Unit 4, Political Organization of Space. In this unit, we will be covering core areas and multi-core states, capital cities, gerrymandering, centrifugal and centripetal forces, devolution, supranationalism, the United Nations, the European Union, the collapse of the USSR, and a new world order. At the beginning of this unit, we will be covering core areas as well as multi-core states. states facing centrifugal forces such as strong regional separatism or internal dispute often move to transfer more power to regional governments to help reduce the divisive tensions by giving angry groups more regional power and autonomy. Devolution is the process of transferring some power from the central government to the regional governments. For example, Scotland was pushing for more autonomy from England. This is the separation of powers from national to local governments. Supranationalism is the growing trend of three or more countries forming an alliance for cultural, economic, or military reasons. Supranational alliances are created so that states can collectively reach a common goal that they may not be able to reach independently. If a country threatens other states, the affected supranational organizations may impose international sanctions or punishments in the form of economic or diplomatic limits or even isolation. United Nations. This was formed in the aftermath of World War II. The Warsaw Pact was a supranational organization of communist allies, while the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, also known as NATO, was formed to combat the expansion of communist states. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is another example of political supranationalism. This was formed in the 1960s to protect its member states from invasion by China. The United Nations. This was formed in 1945, and it is the closest structure to a world government on the earth. Its headquarters and all of its main organs, except the International Court of Justice, are located in New York City on a plot of land that is considered international territory. Now we're going to cover the parts of the United Nations. The General Assembly is a part that all member states send a representative to this parliament-like deliberative body. Each member state has an equal vote in the General Assembly, regardless of the state's size or power. Next, we have the Security Council. These are the peacekeepers of the United Nations. They have a force of troops meant only to be used to defend member states and their people from threats to their sovereignty or peacekeeping missions. After that, we have Economic and Social Council. This is the arm of the UN that coordinates anti-poverty and pro-humanitarian efforts throughout the world. It is also charged with promoting cultural awareness and improving global health. After that, we have International Court of Justice, or the ICJ. This is the United Nations' principal judicial organ located in the Peace Palace in The Hague, the Netherlands. The ICJ settles all legal disputes submitted to it by the UN member states in addition to giving legal advice to the UN. This is composed of 15 judges who are elected for 9-year terms by the Security Council in the General Assembly. The ICJ has declared English and French as its official languages. Last but most certainly not least, we have the Secretariat. This is the executive branch of the UN that is in charge of all administrative issues to keep the UN operating. The head of the Secretariat is the UN Secretary General, who is appointed by the General Assembly on recommendation of the Security Council. The European Union. The European Union, also known as the EU, is an example of economic supranationalism and represents the growth of a European economic community that has been formally developed since the 1950s. The European Union is composed of the European Economic Community, also known as the Common Market, which was formed among some states wanting economic integration and cooperation. The EU is perhaps the most powerful supranational alliance in the world because its member states have bound together their economies, currencies, and environmental policies to create a powerful internal market in Europe. Most member countries use the euro, a common currency. Some geographers project that the EU will soon evolve into a military alliance as well among other member states. Nonetheless, its economic integration has created a rival to the economic superpower status of the United States. The growth of the supranational alliances challenges conceptions of the state's sovereignty. To join such an alliance, states must often give up some powers they have to the organization. Some European countries, particularly England, were reluctant to give up their currencies and use the euro. The United States Congress chooses not to enter the League of Nations despite President Woodrow Wilson's advocacy for joining it. Congress also did not agree to enter the League of Nations after World War I, in part because the United States did not want to have to abide by the decisions of a supranational organization, which would have meant giving up some sovereignty in the United States. Collapse of the USSR. This is also known as the fall of communism. Following the Russian Revolution of 1917, the monarchy was overthrown by the communists, who created the communist state called Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. The USSR was organized as a federation of states called Union Republics, with Russia as its largest Union Republic. By 1960, the USSR was comprised of 16 republics. Its geographic expanse extended throughout what was the Russian Empire into Eastern Europe after World War II. The effects of the competition between the democratic U.S. allies and the USSR's communist allies, a conflict known as the Cold War, led to the eventual devolution and balkanization of what was the USSR. After a period of fierce crushing of political dissent in the 1950s to 1970s in Russia, a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, was elected as the USSR's leader and ushered in a period of devolutionary reforms such as the following: more freedom of speech and regional political sovereignty, the destruction of the Soviet-administrated Berlin Wall that divided democratic West Berlin from communist-controlled East Berlin, foreshadowed the fall of the Soviet control of its satellite states and constituent regions calling for their independence. By 1991, several Union republics had formally voted to secede from the USSR and form their own nation-states. The USSR was declared dissolved that same year by its communist government, from which Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. Gorbachev's successor, Boris Yeltsin, became president of Russia, no longer called the Soviet Union. All of these states that were once in the USSR were now independent and on their own. A new world order. This is a shift in powers and orders. During the Cold War and the aftermath of World War II, states were divided into two camps, pro-communist and pro-democratic. This bipolar world was relatively balanced. A geopolitical transition has occurred since the fall of the Soviet Empire in the 1990s. In this new world order, international relations are no longer driven by the bipolar communist/anti-communist groups. Instead, international relations are multi-layered and complex. Economically, many poles of superpower exist, including the U.S. economy, the European Union, and the growing Chinese economy. Military, the National The United States maintains the superpower status, but it is increasingly challenged by terrorism and other types of warfare. That's everything that we have to cover for Unit 4, Political Organization of Space. Thank you for listening to everything that we've had to say, and good luck on your test.